For over 1,000 years, the massive Theodosian walls of Constantinople stood entirely undefeated. 23 separate armies marched against them. 23 separate empires brought the full might of their civilizations to these gates. And every single one of them failed. The city was considered a geopolitical mathematical impossibility to conquer. The Christian world securely believed that God himself had drawn the blueprints for its defense. To the medieval mind, Constantinople was not just a city. It was the eternal, unbreakable capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. But in the spring of 1453, a 21-year-old ruler decided to defy both theology and mathematics. To destroy the Unbreakable, Sultan Mehmed II didn't just bring an army. He brought physics-defying superweapons, a radical strategy of psychological terror, and a secret engineering plan so utterly insane. It required physically dragging an entire navy over dry land, through a forest, in the dead of night. This is the definitive narrative of the mastermind who orchestrated the death of the ancient world. When Mehmed II ascended to the Ottoman throne in 1451, the royal courts of Europe didn't panic. They openly celebrated. To them, the new sultan was nothing more than an inexperienced boy, a 19-year-old child trapped in the towering shadow of his legendary father, Murad II. In fact, Mehmed had been given the throne once before as a child, only to be humiliated and removed because the empire's Grand Vizier believed he was too weak to lead. The world remembered that boy. They thought he was soft. They thought he was broken. For centuries, the mighty Christian capital of Constantinople had used brilliant political manipulation to keep the Ottoman Empire divided. They kept the Ottomans perpetually locked in civil conflict by funding rival princes and inciting internal wars. The European kings assumed this young, untested ruler would be incredibly easy to manipulate, easily frightened, and easily broken by their old diplomatic tricks. They had no idea they were dealing with a sociopathic genius. While Europe laughed, Mehmed quietly obsessed. He spent his youth refusing to play the games of a typical prince. Instead, he fluently mastered 6 languages, deeply studied the failed military campaigns of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, and became a fanatic for mathematics and engineering. Where older, wiser generals saw an impenetrable fortress protected by divine right, the young sultan saw a grand math problem waiting to be solved. He knew that the old ways of war would fail. If he was going to conquer the ancient world, he would have to invent the modern one. The problem Mehmed faced was terrifying. The Theodosian walls were a triple-layered system of stone and brick, 60 feet high and 20 feet thick, flanked by a deep, water-filled moat. Conventional catapults and siege towers were completely useless. They were like throwing pebbles at a mountain. Mehmed realized that to shatter stone of this magnitude, he needed a force that completely defied the current laws of physics. Enter Urban, a brilliant, rogue Hungarian engineer. Urban had originally gone to the Byzantine emperor, offering to build a revolutionary weapon. But the bankrupt Christian empire couldn't afford his high fees or the raw materials he required. They turned him away. When Mehmed heard of this, he immediately tracked Urban down. The young sultan did not bargain. He gave Urban unlimited funding, a massive army of laborers, and a simple, chilling question. Can you build a cannon capable of shattering the walls of Babylon itself? Urban replied, I have tested the math. I can cast a cannon that will reduce even the walls of Constantinople to absolute dust. In the secret foundries of Adrianople, workers labored day and night under brutal conditions to cast Mehmed's monster. It was a bronze supercannon, 27 feet long, with barrel walls 8 inches thick. It weighed nearly 20 tons and was designed to fire massive solid stone balls weighing over 1,200 pounds. This was the birth of heavy artillery. This was a weapon of pure psychological terror. But building the monster was only half the problem. The logistical nightmare was unprecedented. It took 60 oxen, braced by 200 men on each side, to keep it steady, just to drag this single weapon across 150 miles of rough, unpaved terrain toward Constantinople. Teams of engineers had to be sent ahead just to level roads and reinforce wooden bridges. Slowly, painfully, the weapon moved forward. The countdown to the end of an empire had officially begun. On April 6, 1453, Mehmed unleashed hell. The great cannon opened fire. The ground shook for miles, and the apocalyptic roar of the blast could be heard across the sea. The stone walls, which had stood proud for a millennium, began to fracture and crumble under the immense kinetic energy. But the Byzantines were resilient. They knew their survival depended on holding the line. Every single night, under the absolute cover of darkness, the entire civilian population, women, monks, and children, rushed to the smoking breaches, desperately rebuilding the walls using barrels of earth, wood, and rubble. Weeks passed. The siege was stalling. The Ottoman casualties were mounting, and the Janissaries, Mehmed's elite soldiers, were growing restless. To make matters worse, Constantinople had a secret weapon, geography. Their northern flank was protected by a body of water called the Golden Horn. To prevent the Ottoman navy from entering and attacking the city's weakest walls, the Byzantines floated a massive, unbreakable iron chain across the entire mouth of the harbor. Every time Mehmed's fleet attempted to force their way in, they were brutally repelled by Byzantine defensive fire and superior naval positioning. The siege was failing. The pressure on the 21-year-old Sultan was becoming unbearable. His older advisors, who had always doubted his youth, openly begged him to retreat before a European relief army arrived to crush them. Mehmed was backed into a corner. If he failed here, his reign, and likely his life, was over. True genius shows itself only when defeat looks absolute. Mehmed knew that if he couldn't break the chain in the water, he would have to bypass the water entirely. He stared at the rugged, heavily forested hills of Galata that separated his army from the secure harbor. And then he conceived one of the most insane, logistically impossible engineering feats in human history. On the night of April 22nd, under total silence, Mehmed executed his masterstroke. He ordered thousands of soldiers to secretly clear a path through the forest over the hills. They laid down thousands of massive wooden logs, completely coating them in thick layers of slick animal fat and lard to create a giant, greased runway across the earth. Then, using teams of hundreds of oxen, human strength, and complex pulley systems, the Ottomans did the unthinkable. In the dead of night, they physically dragged 70 fully armed massive warships out of the sea, up a steep hill, straight through a dark forest, and slid them back down into the harbor on the other side of the iron chain. To hide the noise of the ships creaking over the wood, Mehmed ordered his military bands to play loudly and unleashed a massive artillery bombardment on the front walls, keeping the defenders completely distracted. When the sun rose, the citizens of Constantinople looked out their windows and froze in pure terror. A massive enemy fleet was sitting casually in their supposedly secure harbor. Mehmed had literally rewritten the laws of naval warfare. The psychological defense of the city was completely shattered. They were now forced to split their exhausted, dwindling forces to defend two fronts at once. The trap was sprung. On May 29th, 1453, Mehmed ordered the final absolute assault. He unleashed everything he had left. wave after wave of irregular forces, followed by the heavy infantry, and finally, the unstoppable Janissaries crashed against the exhausted, bleeding defenders. The walls finally gave way. Seeing that the city was lost, the last Roman emperor, Constantine XI, tore off his imperial silk robes, threw his crown into the dirt, and charged on foot into the oncoming tide of swords, never to be seen again. The lineage of the Caesars had ended. At just 21 years old, Sultan Mehmed II rode his horse slowly through the fractured gates of Constantinople. He walked into the Hagia Sophia and claimed it for his empire. He had done what the greatest armies and emperors of human history had failed to do for 1,000 years. The Middle Ages were dead. The modern era had officially begun. History is never shaped by those who follow the rules, but by those who have the sheer brilliance to rewrite them. If you want to uncover the raw, cinematic truth behind the legends of the past, subscribe to Loreify. Journey backward into history